do you think the world would be a better place if men were more vulnerable? Well, yeah, like there's a benchmark for being vulnerable in the sense of just naturally being tough.
Men are vulnerable though.
Do you think all men are vulnerable, or do you think?
In one way or another?
Because when I do think about like stuff that's happened in the world, and like when you hear cases and stuff like that, I think like the whole idea of embarrassment. You said things about embarrassment, and like if men weren't afraid to be embarrassed in a certain situation, you might have not felt that way. Do you get what I mean? So when you say men are vulnerable, they might be vulnerable with certain things, but let's say you talk about something that's triggering, all of a sudden you realize they're not as vulnerable
But
as
that trigger is more associated with being insecure, not vulnerable.
so but the vulnerable and insecurities are close in the sense
Yeah,
of
I mean you can say that they're side by side, but when you're looking at that, that's more an insecurity. When I'm talking vulnerability, I'm talking I can cry to you today and tell you I can't do this. Wake up tomorrow and then do it. What I needed at that time was to just be vulnerable. I needed to release myself. So you see, sometimes, like I take myself for example, when I pray, I think that's when I'm at my most vulnerable stage. Because at that point there, it's me, my sultana, and my Bible, and my power cloth. And sometimes I cry, sometimes I shake. And by the time I finished getting that out of my system, being that vulnerable space, it was enough for me to now go and attack the world again and do what I need to do. You know what I'm saying? So to be vulnerable is needed to a degree. To tell yourself that you're not vulnerable would be a lie. That means you're fighting your feelings. Sometimes it gets too much. Sometimes we just want to talk to someone and release. Doesn't mean you're going to solve the problem, but I want to release my frustration. And sometimes that comes in the form of crying. Sometimes that comes in the form of, you know? So, you know what I mean?
So do you feel there's a cost to being vulnerable? Because
Of course,
yeah, like you see how you mentioned about your son
yeah.
being vulnerable with you. Now, depending on how you and the mum react to him,
Yeah.
will depend how vulnerable he is later on in life. Do you see what I mean? Especially with you lot.
Yeah.
So, what do you believe are the costs to being vulnerable?
I
Like,
think
what's the risk?
I think when you're too vulnerable, you open yourself up for different kind of problems that you have in the world, and one of the problems being that people will abuse that vulnerability.
Mm.
So I don't think, let's just say in the boardroom with Alan Sugar, what's that program? Apprentice. I don't think personally I would be vulnerable with any one of the cast members in Apprentice. Or is it cast members? The people, the group, the people. Because they're the candidates, sorry. Because I wouldn't be surprised my vulnerability in that situation. Now you come and hot me up in front of Alan Sugar. Well, that day you said that you couldn't handle it, and I had to help you through that. So I just think he's a weak candidate. Whoa! I spoke to you and we was having a moment. That didn't mean I couldn't but now you've abused my vulnerability. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, you got to be very careful with who you're vulnerable with. Do you know what I'm saying? Being too vulnerable will have people abuse that. And that's not because the world is bad. That's because the world is competitive.
And then
However way you want to look at it, society is what it is. It's like, yeah, we're all together, but at the same time, I want to win, you want to win. If I can do certain things to throw you off your game, boom. If we're playing basketball, you and I, and we're talking, and I feel like you're winning this game, and you've been vulnerable with me about, let's say, your dad passing, RIP Pops, and I can say one or two things to throw you off your game. You think they don't do that in the game? It's not personal all the time. Someone wants to win. You're scoring too many points. Now you're distracted mentally.
So do you think that's like similar to being in a relationship where men don't get vulnerable?
Yeah, because you're afraid, innit?
Mm.
You're afraid that, not even that, because the corporate world, let's just say, or the business or the society in itself, that's a different kind of fear. The one that you fear the most is the person that you're with, because they know you. And ultimately, they can break you. They can break you completely, especially when you are legit vulnerable with that person. They know you in and out. You've opened up. But at the same time, as you've opened up, the part that we always look past is how beautiful it is. It is dangerous, don't get me wrong. But mate, as much as she can break you, it's the same way she can take you to another level. It's the same way she's got your back full on. That's what I'm saying. When you say you're locked in, she knows in that situation, yeah, you wasn't this, you wasn't that, you can't quickly respond. She'll step in quickly. Yeah, well, he wasn't asking in the first place. She didn't do that because she just whatever. She did it because she locked in with you. She knew when to step in. Same way you're locked in with her. Oh, well, I don't know how. I can't. And yeah, whatever. Excuse me. Talk to me. That's my woman. And what's the problem now? What do you need? But then if you don't protect that vulnerability, it just becomes negative. If you abuse that vulnerability, we can't see the beauty in the thing no more. I'm serious. It's dangerous. You know what I'm saying? Like, being in a position where I can step in for you allows you to feel safe. Being in a position where you can step in for me allows me to feel safe. Yours might be physical, mine might be emotional. And it stops me from going to go and express to strangers who might use my vulnerability against me. Because you might not be team Gabz. You might be team whatever. Pretending to be team Gabz. You know what I'm saying? So to be vulnerable is a wonderful feeling. And I don't think you can unlock the true beauty of love until you understand the importance of being vulnerable.
That's an interesting perspective, bro.
Yeah, I don't think you can. It's a tricky one. But at the same time, I understand the fear for men. If I'm vulnerable with you and you abuse that vulnerability, mm.
Nah, you know what it is as well. I think sometimes as well,
It goes back to that broke stuff, doesn't it?
even
When the man is broke and the man is vulnerable with you and says he's broke, rather than take time, you now mug me off for it. You go and tell your friends about it. In public, you will shame me for it. And if you don't, you know what? That's the outside embarrassment. The inside embarrassment is how you then move towards me. Like I ain't shit. Why? Because I couldn't do this anymore. Just because I'm having a bad patch doesn't mean it's always going to be like this, but look at how you're moving. Now you expect that man to want to be vulnerable again? Don't play with us because them again, men are very delicate when it comes to emotions. They're more delicate than women. We're not emotionally led in the way that women are. So when we do give our emotions, it is a big goddamn deal.
don't take it for granted, innit?
Don't take it for granted, blood. I'm serious, don't. It is a big deal. And we'll firm it for as long as we can, but after a while, we turn into monsters. And that monster you won't like when it comes to men. You know, our emotions, we're not good at it the way women are. We're
Yeah.
not as
So
resilient.
nah, you could definitely tell. But the reason why I was earlier talking about vulnerability, I think also that's what's created this culture of like stunting and fronting, because guys don't want to tell the truth. So it's like, instead of guys are being real with how they feel about a situation, they just harbor it, or they don't deal with the situation. And that's why sometimes that's why I was alluding earlier with the question of, will men being vulnerable make the world a better place? Because then, at least then, we could be more honest with ourselves. But if we're hiding behind stuff and we're not being vulnerable with how we feel, we will just keep up a lie. You know what I mean?
I get how you're using vulnerable in that in what you're asking, but the money issue is an insecurity, not a vulnerability.